Hey, my name is Eva, and this is Blond Quantum, the podcast that breaks down quantum technology into real world business impact. Here, we make the complex simple. No equation, no overthinking, just insight, innovation, and a bit of humor. So don't worry, you don't need a PhD in physics to follow. In each episode, I talk to founders, scientists, and investors about how quantum is reshaping the industries today, not in some distant future. Oh, and if you hear a black cat purring in the background, that's my co-host, very alive Schrödinger's cat, joining the conversation. Her name is Moon. Let's get started. Welcome, everyone, in the next episode of Blond and Quantum. Today is a special day because we are recording this episode during the World Quantum Day. And the first time in the history of Blond and Quantum, I have a pleasure to host a quantum expert who's happened to be a woman, and not any woman. Professor Eleni Diamanti. She's a leading experimentalist in quantum communication and cryptography with a distinguished career that includes, amongst others, the Stanford PhD, a European Research Council starting grant, and the 2024 CNRS Silver Innovation Medal. She works as a CNRS Research Director at Sorbonne University. And for those who are just scratching their head and thinking, what is actually CNRS? Is a French National Center for Scientific Research. Eleni is also director of PCQT, the France National Quantum Strategy, and she also has been served as a vice chair of the European Quantum Technologies Flagship Strategy Advisory. And on top of all of this, she's also a co-founder of Welinq, quantum memory startup, raising a Series A right now. I have no words. You are like so accomplished.
Thank
you. Bring the world of the fundamental research and national policy, and you have experience at deep tech startupper. This is like very rare. So thank you so much for being here today with us.
Thank you so much, Eva, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's probably a bigger pleasure for me, really. Eleni, let's start from talking a little bit from the policy and strategy angle. Paris, please tell me what makes Paris a serious contender as a global quantum hub? There's certainly a lot of going on in Paris right now. So what's your opinion?
Yeah, so Paris, first of all, I guess it kind of follows the history of quantum technologies, right? Because Paris is home to some of the most, some groups, some research groups that were extremely very strong in physics and in mathematics. So there is a big tradition in general in France, in fundamental science and in particular mathematics and physics. But in particular, Paris labs have hosted like a number of Nobel Prize winners that actually set the foundations of the second quantum revolution, which is the revolution that, of course, underpins quantum technologies. So actually, when I'm thinking of your question, I think it's a very natural place to see quantum technologies grow so nicely. So now, how has it evolved? So going from fundamental science and research to a hub, an ecosystem, a quantum ecosystem, bringing together researchers, entrepreneurs, and policymakers is not easy. It has taken a lot of effort. So already, as we explained, we have the good basis of academia and of the fundamentals of research. And then I guess there were conditions in the last few years in France and in Paris that helped us, I guess, as researchers, so that when I'm talking like this, it's an academic researcher, to spin off, okay? Like the conditions were good to create companies, to accelerate this creation of the ecosystem. Many of them are around Paris, although I should not say only Paris, there is also in the rest of France as well, in many hubs as well. And so now, with all of this, it has created an extremely dynamic ecosystem. I see it from our students that, they do their master degree or their doctorate degree, and they can be absorbed by the quantum industry. There is so many good examples of quantum industries in the Paris region that is quite amazing.
I
It's a
agree,
perfect place.
and I think it's good that you mentioned that because recently I spoke with Michael Cabot from the UK, and um, actually France was very distinguished in terms of the research that, as you said, it started very very early, much earlier than the national quantum French policy strategy that was established, I think, in 2021, if I'm correct.
Yes, the first
Yeah.
phase, and now the
The
second phase is in preparation right now.
Exactly.
The second
But
phase.
the research
Mm.
started much, much
Oh
earlier.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I think this is the reason why so much going on in terms of startup popping up in
yeah,
France right now. Your government is also very active and
yeah.
supporting as a also as investor, which is rare in Europe, I guess. Although the rest of Europe's trying
Of
to
course,
catch
yeah,
up
yeah,
on this, right?
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
actually, let's talk a little bit about the Europe. So a lot of experts, especially when I talk to US based experts, they saying that, it's so fragmented and it's always a problem. From
mm.
your perspective, do you think that the fragmentation of Europe is actually a weakness, or maybe there is something in it and it's our, I don't know, hidden strength?
Okay, so this is a very good question. So I think we should be a bit pragmatic about it.
Mhm.
I think, although I'm a fierce European, um,
Me too, by the way.
yeah. So fragmentation is a reality. Fragmentation is a reality, and I think it has been acknowledged. It is acknowledged by everyone. We know it. The member
Yeah.
states know. How does fragmentation? What is the effect of fragmentation? What we see is that there possibly too much redundancy. So it shows as a redundancy in national strategies, right? So we may be doing multiple member states of the EU, for example, in Europe, may be doing the same thing in parallel, which is a little bit of a pity sometimes because we could have done it together, like collectively put our forces together and not have to create this redundancy. Fragmentation can also show up a bit in different policies, different, timelines, a little bit of different priorities as well, depending on the strength
National level.
of each of the country, which shows in the strategy. But now this actually concludes the negative part because I think there is also positive things in the European model is the fact that we have a collective ecosystem thanks to, of course, the European Commission and the Council and all of this organization of the European Union in particular, that creates as well a lot of dialogue, right? And a lot of possibility to have an actual impact. Each one of the countries, the European countries, may be too weak to make a difference with respect, for example, to other big powerhouses in the world. All together, we can have what is sometimes called the Brussels effect, in policies that we have seen it, like for example in AI, we have seen it, in general in digital affairs, that Europe altogether can have the capacity to impose its model. And I think that's important. And I hope we will see this happening in quantum as well.
Do you think it may also potentially, strengthen the competitiveness between the countries and the startups?
What I think is going to happen, and maybe we can talk about it more extensively, maybe at this point, there is possibly almost certainly too many startups, okay,
That's
in Europe.
interesting. That's
Yeah,
interesting story, and I would love
this
to
is
follow up on
this
this
is
later.
likely the case. Yeah, we can talk about it. So I think what can happen is that what will possibly happen is that we're going to see a lot more, consolidation, merging, and I think that
Solution?
which also will reduce the effects of fragmentation. So I think what's happening actually at the European level, and this is an information at this point, is that we're trying to make it possible to have less effect of national barriers in creating companies and actually making a bit easier with like a regime that would allow companies to become European, and
Good.
so to grow at a European scale rather than at a national scale. And I think this will help a lot.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. So, do you think, as a conclusion, Europe can realistically compete with the US and China on that scale in the future?
Yeah, I still hope. Okay, you find me at the point where I'm a little bit, yes, in between. I'm a natural optimist, okay, but at this point, there are reasons to have a little bit worries, okay, to be a little bit worried. I think Europe has an extremely. What are our strengths? Okay, we have extremely strong research and academic basis. Okay, we have a hugely dynamic startup ecosystem. Okay, we see it like a really good technology that we know how to build. we are we have this fragmentation effect we talk about, but at the same time we know how to build the infrastructures, which is important because then this is necessary, to give access to both researchers and industry as a common platform to validate their technology and push, from research to actual product. Okay, so we know how to do this well. What we don't know how to do, and this affects our competitiveness, is how to scale up our industry. So we have a lot less private capital. I mean, we can even
Yeah.
call it
I
like
was
this.
gonna
We have
say
yeah,
it's
we have a
connected to the funding, right? In many
it is
cases,
connected to the
I see
funding.
that as well from the perspective of my job. That a lot of later on startup are actually complaining on the access of the growth capital
Yeah,
in Europe, and they are basically forced to look somewhere else. So this is
the,
something that you think is going to change in the next future in Europe?
there is a
We should-
very strong will right now at the level of Europe to fight this, to somehow find a way to create the instruments that will make it possible to not have to go as it is today, the situation for funding to non-European. This is a bit mandatory today. There is just not enough
Yeah,
capital. And so it's completely impossible not to do it. And so you have to. And so there is all these ideas that I was telling you about, making it easier. There is like these new ideas about making funds, big funds, private funds in Europe. What I think will happen is may private public governments need to step in as well, and somehow we need to see. We will see some sort of merger, some combination between a significant public funding, which Europe does well. We will know how to do this well in terms of public funding with respect to the US in particular, for example, and then find a model that will balance this and that will manage to keep some sort of sovereignty. I think this will be critical in the
I
next
agree.
few years.
I think governments should step in, especially in the industry like quantum or AI, the ones that are strategically important,
Yeah.
because obviously, like B2B SaaS will be fine on private capital. And I
Yes.
think France here, it could be a really good role model because
Yeah.
France is already doing it, right? By the
I
amount
think
of
so. I
the
think so.
startup that they
Yeah.
invested with the
Yeah.
government.
At least we're trying. At least we're trying.
Yeah.
Maybe I should also say something because we talked about, a fight between US and China. As an academic, I like open science, right? Science is done in a collaborative and open way, and we have we're super collaborative
Yeah.
with our. I did my PhD in the US, right? And I have many.
And I live in the US on a daily basis.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. With European American colleagues and also with Chinese actually. But yeah, we cannot be completely naive about it. So there is some transition between science, that needs to be open and collaborative, and finding this scale up of companies and finding like a right balance between these industrial needs and the market. So that's important.
That's correct. We definitely should not be closed for collaboration,
Mm-hmm.
but still keep in mind
Mm.
about
Yeah.
the strength we have and use it, right? That's
Yeah,
you're right,
exactly.
probably. The collaborative level is on the academic level, and then once you start to creating private companies, it's a little bit more competitive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, that's very good that you mentioned that because I wanted to just smoothly go and ask you based on your
Mm-hmm.
academia experience and the background. Let's talk a little bit about the public research versus startup. So,
Mm-hmm.
still, quantum is such a special industry because everything is different here, right? It's the time from going from a public research to a product or services. The journey is much longer
Yeah.
than in any other startups, I guess. And still, most of the breakthroughs are coming from academia. So, where exactly, from your perspective, is the place where startups adding a value?
Well, from my own experience, growing from an academic lab and seeing how things work in a startup, there is a big difference. Since I have created my startup, I find everything very slow in academia. We are so slow. I mean, which is normal, right? It's kind of inherent in the way that fundamental research works, that you need to, question yourself, find the right way. You will do it wrongly, then you will try again. And then you always need to look for funding as well, which is actually true for startups as well. But startups, the way that I see it, that they have the added value is this acceleration, that they can take something that would take you much longer to scale up in your academic lab and actually make this product. It's not our job in any case in academic lab, right, to do a product.
Yeah.
So what a startup can do is to take this technology that you have validated at a low TRL, technology readiness level, right, and then accelerate it. So it can take in 2 years, what I saw in my startup, it can take an optical table. So an optical table is a device that takes like a whole room, okay, with all of this equipment, and put it within 2 years, right, in a like a product that works 10 key, okay, that works continuously in operational conditions and actually has even better performance than what you had in your full room. This is the capacity, the added value of a startup. And why can it do that? It has obviously more funding, and because it can attract like more important quantities of funding at the same time, and it also has an unbelievable concentration of extremely well qualified people working together, and without having to, teach or to do other distractions like conferences and stuff. So I think this is the main added value of.
And you mentioned that everything in academia take longer. I agree with it, but I would say maybe that's for better,
Of
because
course.
knowing as some startup operate with the philosophy, fake it till you make it and so on. It's good to know there are still industry where, the research is taking the time and we ensuring that that's what we're doing is correct and it's right and it's working.
Of course, that's our job. Yeah, yeah,
Going from
absolutely.
this perspective, what do you think is the strength of academia? What academia actually do better than the startup in quantum today?
Academia, what we can do is that we can validate proof of principle ideas. So we can create new ideas, okay,
Mhm.
that will answer to the challenges of. Okay, so I'm talking. From a point of view of someone who's quite applied, right? My research is quite applied. This is not. This is why I even, I contributed to a company. I don't do only fundamental physics or fundamental. Otherwise, of course, the objective would be to just advance science. But obviously, my goal has always been in my group to demonstrate a quantum advantage for this quantum communication and cryptography protocols that have been shown. And seeing it being deployed in, like as a product is unbelievably rewarding, right? So what I can do as an academic researcher, being in this position that I like, that I have chosen as a researcher, is to try new ideas, right? To think of new things that you can do with the quantum devices. In my case, quantum networking, okay, and validate it in the lab. This is something that we needed at an academic level, right? To have new ideas and validate them, and
And you have
then you
all the
push to the
infrastructure.
company to push it to the next level. Then it
Yeah,
is.
that's
Yeah,
true. And you have all the resources and infrastructure to
we
do
do.
so, which startups are not having they have very limited access, especially in the beginning, right? Before they
Yeah.
find the funding and so on. So that's definitely crucial. You mentioned before, um, you said something that really sparked my curiosity.
Mm.
You said, "I think we have too many startups,
Yeah.
quantum startups in Europe," and I would love to follow up on this. So, first of all, do you think we have too many startups, and why? And the second question, follow up to this: do you think that the current VC model that we have in Europe is, or not only in Europe, globally, is even suited for quantum startups?
Okay, so on the first question, yes, I think I have to maintain the statement that I made, that I do think that, like for example, it's not in France, right? In the whole Europe. I was talking about
Okay.
Europe as a whole.
Agree.
So like for example, when you have multiple quantum computing companies that are on the same qubit modality, or many QKD companies, companies that do quantum key distribution, just maybe for a different reason. The QKD companies, for the moment, the market does not sufficient to support that many companies. I just think that at some point something will have, unless the market explodes, can happen. You never know. And so, but it's not the case. So it's all a matter of a market, right, for the moment. So quantum computing is a little bit of a different case because, we're like at the level of small quantum processing units that are not actually yet useful,
Yeah.
so it's a race to make the most useful quantum computer.
And
And
then convince the client's potential or
do
customer.
we really need to have four quantum computing in photonics or neutral atoms or ions in Europe? Do we really need? Why don't we create a champion, a European champion in one of these, so that we can be more? And this is where the question of fragmentation comes into the question, that maybe some countries would like to have their own champion, but I think there is the mentalities are moving, and now we're moving towards the direction of realizing that I think it's normal. It takes a few years, right? You need to labs to spin off already their technology to show that they can grow, and then will come the time of the consolidation. I think
You're
that's what's
right.
going to
And
happen.
I think it's a part of the standard journey of the industry creating themselves. And
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure, as I said, teams around the world in the labs are working sometimes on the similar
yes,
technology or
yeah,
similar solutions. And then
yeah,
there is a moment when the consolidation need to happen. And actually, it's very interesting that you said that there may not be enough place for every of these companies that are now existing on the market.
yeah.
Because one of the questions I wanted to ask you is actually, what do you think is the bottleneck? Is it the technology, the talent, or the consumer for quantum startups?
Yeah, so I think, although I think some people disagree, but for me, it's not the talent, not yet. At least in academia, we're trying to train as many quantum engineers as possible. And what I have seen, what I've witnessed already from my group and from my master, there is a flow of super well trained in our group, but in other groups too, quantum engineers that go afterwards and do beautiful things in the startup side, which means basically that we have less postdocs and and professors in academia. So I think there is an appetite, talent for the moment. We should be careful because we would need to continue this training effort, which is the case. I think, like for example, in the French national strategy, training has a very very important role. So I would put it between the technology and customers, but for me, for the moment, the bottleneck is probably with they're linked, right? Because the technology is here, it's advancing, but maybe it's not yet at the satisfaction of the customers, right? So I think the market is a bit small for the moment, is a bit uncertain. It's so I would probably put the bottleneck in the customers
The customer.
that I think so, because but it's because I have to admit that maybe the technology does not offer yet the advantage in performance, something that would make the difference. We haven't seen the AI moment in quantum for the moment, to put it
I uh,
a little bit. We haven't seen it yet. So
I agree with everything what you said. And I think sometimes, from my perspective, speaking with the business leader, even on the executive level, I think many of them are actually confused because we are living in
mm,
the bubble. And as you said, there's many startups in the same qubit modality, but the
okay.
customers, they don't even see what's the difference between the modality.
Exactly.
How do you use it? What's the difference between those two? Why it is important
Yes.
for me, right? I
Yeah,
just want
yeah.
my problem
Yeah,
to be
they
solved.
are trying to navigate a landscape that is extremely technical already, very hard. Announcements all over the place that they don't necessarily understand, of milestones that are important, that are super important, but they don't directly translate into their business. Okay, into their business. So it's a complex landscape, and this
Right,
is
and
why I
they
think
operate
quantum.
on the different, different values and different views. They operate more on the use cases. I don't think most of them really care what kind of technology do we need, as long
Yeah,
as you can solve my
uh,
problem, right?
I
Which
agree with you. Yes,
makes sense.
and that's the problem with this technology, that you need to consider it in the long term. It is not going to give revenue tomorrow. I mean, it's not. Yeah.
Big
So
time.
yeah,
100%. And then
yeah.
the second part of the question, I think we didn't speak about it yet. So do you
Mhm.
think the current VC model we have,
Ah,
is
yeah.
it suitable for quantum startup, or maybe we need to look for something else?
Well, what is the alternative? I think yes. So it's a good question. I don't have an easy answer. So I think the more globally the VC model or the startup model can show a little bit its limits. I think at some point, and this is where for me the solutions we talked about in the beginning, some sort of combination of private of public in stronger public investment, but together we cannot completely remove the private funds, right? And this is not possible.
No. I would like to see the world which is only
Yeah,
relying on the public funding.
it's difficult for in a sector where we don't have big revenues yet. I think it's difficult to not have a VCs involved into the
I
funding.
think it's two sides edged sword, because from one side the public funding also maybe have a different forms, right? We have a grant, we have academic grants,
Of
we have
course,
grants for
yes.
early stage startups, but we also have in some countries like France, the government
Mhm.
stepping in as a
Yeah.
sovereignty fund and investing directly or
Mm.
half directly in some
Yeah.
cases, right? But also from the private market perspective, what I see, there's not many venture capital firms which are focusing specifically on quantum. Maybe more popping up right now on the market, which is very good basically for the
Mm.
market, right? But
Yeah.
from Quantum Nation perspective, Quantum Nation started in 2018
Mhm.
and was probably one of the first, if not the first,
Yeah.
globally, right? So the only one dedicated to do that space. So we need more focus on the private aspect as well, on different stages, on the early stages, but also
Absolutely. And I think this is the way the field is going. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, completely. We need more quantumation, more like a more focus in any case in VCs that support really the sector. That I understand it as well because it's complicated, as you were saying. You need to understand it. So it's a very special. It's a very
I'm pretty sure Christoph and Olivier will be
listening.
that. Yes. Okay. But changing topic a little bit, I would love
Yeah.
to talk a little bit from the process of going from the lab to real world deployment. And I think
Mhm.
you have very, very unique experience on this, having exposure for both. So from your perspective, Eleni, what do you think, what's the biggest gap between a lab demo and a real quantum network?
Okay, big. There is quite a few. Yes, I have seen this happening, and actually, we are in the process actually of building real quantum networks. Right, we're still in some intermediary phase. So now, what we know how to do pretty well is lab demonstrations. Okay, whereas we were saying before, you validate your technology, so you know that you can make it stable enough in the lab. And that you can actually operate it. You have shown your quantum advantage in whatever you want to show it, and so now you want to deploy it in an infrastructure. So the very first thing that you need to do, so I'm talking as someone who's working with communication networks, for example, with optical fibers, right? Or
Okay.
free space links, satellite. So the very first thing to do is to work with infrastructure providers, right? And
Mhm.
so this can be telecom operators or satellite operators who already speak a different language. And so the important thing is to start working together on integration aspects, laying down, of course, the infrastructure or reuse the one that is already in place, and then putting quantum devices on the two ends and making them work. Like there is all sorts of very engineering and aspects that kick in, from the synchronization of all sorts of challenges that you have to face, all the layer as well of networking, right, on how to make these devices talk and how they give the outputs. And this is what a real infrastructure means for me. When you start operationally being able to demonstrate this advantage, to actually show that you have run your system in real conditions, is what make it an infrastructure, and then you can put it in the service potential of other people. This is the whole goal of building these infrastructures that we'll do.
I love the example that you gave.
Mm.
I want to follow up on this. So if I'm a telecom company,
Yeah.
when should I actually start investing or investing
Oh,
on?
you're already too late. You have already started invested. I think, and actually we do see. a bit big interest from telecom operators, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they know that quantum communication networking is they will eventually need to provide this service to their customers, and they can also be infrastructure providers, but also service providers. And so they went quite fast, quite quickly beyond the phase, of just learning how it is, what it is. We see sometimes some industry sectors that are coming to the events to just listen, to see what's going on, what are the actors and what they are doing. So telecom operators are among the ones that were pretty fast in creating even their own teams and starting to working with academic researchers to learn how it works. And then we do like the joint in France. We have these joint PhDs, between industry and academia and universities. So we have this very established collaborative PhD. So this is one way, for them to gain know-how. And so it's been a few years now. That's why I'm saying it's too late if you haven't done it, if you're a
Yeah.
telecom operator and you haven't done it yet.
So from what you see on the market in terms of the telecoms, most of those companies already have their own teams. Do you see them trying to, innovate inside, or they rather support the university and the collaboration through the connected PhD and maybe then investing in startups the next step and so on?
Yeah, yes, yeah. I think from what I've seen, it's mostly they have their own teams. So actually, you can find now a job as a quantum engineer in telecom companies and satellite companies like this. There are actually positions there. I would say that although there are some cases where you see some innovation, in those cases, it's not like a startup where there is real innovation. They are a little bit different. I think they see themselves as providing the use case usually and also the infrastructure. I think mostly their role is situated there.
Okay. Okay. Let's make a sense. And how
Yeah.
far are we from having a first like functioning quantum internet? Because I know there's actually a startup in, I think, in New York that demonstrated already like 2 weeks connection. But from your perspective, before we have fully functioning quantum internet, how far are we?
Yeah, something before to answer this question, the problem is that we need to define the quantum internet, right? What exactly is the quantum internet? Because it's not
Let's do it.
like, yes, let's do it. It's not like the classical internet, right? It's not like
Mhm.
the internet that allows you and me to talk right now, right? Quantum internet is not going to be like that, right? It's going to be general purpose, yes, quantum network, but used for specific for some to demonstrate where quantum communication has a sense to be deployed, right? And this can be for secure communication, of course. This is one of the flagship applications of quantum networks. It can also be quantum internet. It can even be like my favorite, which is like interconnecting quantum devices in data centers and this type of things. So quantum networking is going to be used for all of these applications. Actually, defining the use cases of a quantum internet is a major objective of the field in the next few years, right? So we know that we can do distributed quantum computing. We know we can do secure communication, sensor networks of sensors, etc. But we need more applications of a quantum internet. And so to actually deploy a quantum internet, for me means to be able to transfer quantum information entanglement, which is like the
Favorite
basic
one.
yes entanglement to locations where they are needed. How do I see this? I see entanglement as a resource, has become now a resource, a bit like energy or bandwidth, where a research are a resource for our communications today. Entanglement, so it has to be efficiently generated, distributed, allocated by specific algorithms and consumed. And you want to optimize that at each one of these levels. So for me, a quantum internet is a device, is like an infrastructure that manages to do that from the physical layer, where the entanglement is generated and distributed and synchronized with quantum memories and quantum repeaters and brought into the end users, which can be quantum sensors or quantum computers, for example. And then you have to do this all the layers. You have to allocate all of this resource properly, knowing that it's a very fragile resource. Okay. So how far are we from this? We have some, embryonic demonstrations like the one in New York. We have
Running. I like that.
some examples, how a quantum internet will look like when it's deployed full scale. We have a few years, I think. So to
2 years.
answer a very long detour to answer your questions, I think we
Okay.
still need a few years to see a fully functional quantum
But
internet.
few years you will define as more 3 years or 5 years or 8 years? How many?
By 2030. I know it's an easy answer, it gives like a round number.
Yeah,
But yeah, I really think that in like 4 or 5 years, we'll see a
we'll
different
have it.
level
Okay.
of functionalities.
So Lenny, just to summarize this for benefits of our non-technical audience, what you're saying is actually that quantum internet is not going to replace our standard internet communication. It will be only deployed in some specific cases, maybe institution. So
Uh,
let's talk a little bit like specific use cases. So for example, what banks,
yeah,
governments, we're going to
I
use.
think I think it will be deployed in synergy with a classical internet,
Yeah,
okay, together when it makes sense. A bit in the same way that quantum computers can be deployed in high performance computing centers, to accelerate some cases. I think that's how the quantum internet will work. And yeah, finance, yeah, banks, but even providing security in critical infrastructure, I think would be very important.
mhm,
Even their own devices, wherever you have data centers, right? Even securing access within
yeah,
data centers or between data centers of banks, of operators, and then of course government, very high confidentiality, government infrastructure, medical medical data as well can be
100%.
one application, and then sensors, I think.
And the sensors. Okay. So what you're saying basically is that in terms of the data centers, I would like to follow up on that.
Mm.
So by saying data centers, you mean specifically data center providers, or by data center, you mean that every single enterprise protecting their data will use an enterprise defined by, I don't know, K plus employees companies
Mhm.
will have to use quantum internet to protect the internal data, right? Because there's a lot of discussion right now about, the threat of quantum breaking encryption.
Yes.
So this is another question. Is it that real or is it overhype and when is that going to happen? But do you think at the end of this journey, in the 5 years from now, every single enterprise level company will have to use quantum internet to protect their own data? Or this is
Yes.
something that will be on the higher level or layer in terms of like, hey, Amazon or Google or any other data center provider will use that instead of me as an enterprise having to use it.
Okay, okay, I'll try to answer to all of the questions because there were many. So no, I don't think. I don't think that it will only be the Amazon and the Google and everything. Of course, they will also need to protect their massive data centers. But actually, what think my a bit vision of what could happen is that even medium-sized, let's say, enterprises will need to protect their assets, their data centers, their communication, and those of their clients with quantum communication. Okay, whether this is like long distance, and so it makes it a real quantum internet, or more modest distance, like shorter distance quantum communication links, it doesn't matter. Let's go not go. The important is that we have the infrastructure and the technology to do it. Okay, so I actually think that it will be a more global need to employ this type of technologies. And to answer your question on the quantum encryption and the threat to encryption by quantum computers, it is actually a very no, it is not overhyped. It is, I truly believe, it's an acute, um, actually very real problem that is happening now, because maybe to the benefit of the non-experts in the audience, what's happening today is that our communications can be secure communications, can be held by some malevolent party, okay, some dishonest party who wants to learn the secrets, kept in a encrypted format somewhere, and then wait until the quantum computer that is strong enough, okay, big enough to be able to decrypt this algorithm comes into, and this we don't know when it's going to happen. But the fact is that the data today are vulnerable to be decrypted by a quantum computer, and even in 5 years, for example, say from now, or even 2029, like Google announced recently. So these timelines are a bit fuzzy; they move a lot. So it is an actual threat. So we need to somehow respond to this threat as a society, as an enterprise.
This is very valuable what you said. I recently also have a discussion with Bill Vass, Bill Vass, the CTO of Buzalen, exactly
Mhm.
on the same question. And I
Mhm.
think he had a very similar
Yeah. Yeah.
conclusion that you have, that this is a real thing. And obviously, the
Mm.
market is talking a lot right now about harvest now, decrypt later,
Yes,
uh,
exactly.
and so on. So, from that perspective, can you please explain what's the difference between post quantum cryptography and quantum communication?
Of course, yes. So post-quantum cryptography is mathematics. Quantum cryptography is physics. Okay, that's an easy answer. That's an
Okay.
easy answer, but it does come down to that, right? Like post-quantum cryptography actually needs new mathematical algorithms
Mhm.
to by default. These mathematical algorithms, we will never be able to prove that they will ever forever be robust against attacks by some very powerful device. That does not mean they are not valuable. So I believe very much in the importance of post quantum cryptography, and I think they will necessarily be deployed unless for some reason all of the post quantum algorithms are proven to be insecure in the next few years. We are going to see deployment of post quantum solutions. There is no question about it. While quantum communication and quantum cryptography give a physics-based security, okay, therefore by default and by design they are robust against attack by quantum computers. They are harder to deploy, of course. They're harder to deploy. They need the new infrastructure because you move from the mathematical layer, which is a bit the foundations of our cybersecurity, to physical layer, and this is something that the cybersecurity world doesn't really have the habit of doing. So it requires a change of mentality, and this is harder, I think, for cybersecurity. But it's in principle, and in practice, I think honestly, it brings an absolute level of security.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Lenny, right now, I would love to talk a little bit more about your startup perspective,
Hmm.
changing a little bit of topic.
Yeah.
And you recently co-founded Welinq while leading a major research ecosystems. And I want to take you some couple of takeaways points on that experience from you, because that's obviously two different worlds
Yeah.
that require, I guess, different side of character of yours. One is like, as you said, like require a lot of patience, it's slow paced. The other one is very dynamic, fast, result focused, quick result focused, right? So what did you learn from that experience?
Yeah, it has been quite a journey. So the startup Welinq was incorporated like in 2022. So it's a relatively young company. Yeah? So it's 4 years. I'm very happy that I did that. I'm actually, it's never easy. Yeah? It's not. I didn't think I was going to do a startup that I was made. I thought, I was a very standard academic researcher who knows how to do fundamental science, publish their papers, and stuff like this. And this is something that I like a lot, right? That's why I do it, like train students, talk with PhD students. This is my favorite still. But I've learned so much by funding the startup, the company Welinq. First of all, I'm really, it actually stimulates me as an academic researcher, which is interesting, right? It brings all sorts of new ideas because it's kind of situated because Welinq does quantum interconnection technology, so the
Yeah.
networking layer of computing. Okay, based on its flagship quantum memory technology. And so this quantum interconnection layer opened a new, like, because I was doing more quantum cryptography and before in my group. And now this idea about distributing information, doing distributed architectures and looking at these protocols and how this quantum interconnected technology, opens new paths to quantum computing. I find it extremely stimulating from a scientific point of view. And then from entrepreneurial point of view, I've learned many things. I'm not sure I like everything about the entrepreneurial work, but I've learned, how to talk to investors, to finance people, it has made me already, I'm in the process also of talking to policymakers or talking to entrepreneurs. Is a whole different world. It's a very instructive experience, and actually learning how the market works, and how you create market attraction, how to talk to investors to convince them that your vision is obvious for you,
Exactly.
but it's not obvious for them, has an added value, is it's really interesting. I honestly like the experience a lot.
That's
It's,
why it's definitely a lot of juggling. That's why I said on the very beginning that you have a very rare experience because there's not many people who can juggle those, two even aspects like technology and
Mhm.
entrepreneurship. And then
Yeah,
on top of it, you also add the policymaking, right? Each of
yeah,
these groups of the
yeah.
shareholders, stakeholders, they just, they receptive on a completely different objectives.
Yeah, and sometimes I have to admit, I guess it needs different parts of the brain because as someone in policy making, you almost have a little bit. Sometimes you of course want to help companies and researchers, but I think as someone who's also, I'm interested in the impact of quantum technologies to society, right, and to people. Very, I pay attention, attentive to responsible innovation, to quantum ethics, to quantum diplomacy. I believe very much in the power of scientific diplomacy. So, on one hand, you have, what we discussed in the beginning, that there is this race between US, China, Europe, and everything. And that, of course, as someone who works in research and entrepreneurship, I want to push Europe as much as possible. On the other hand, I do think that scientific diplomacy, in particular in quantum, is crucial and fundamental to push international collaborations and partnerships and make this whole thing beneficial to everyone, right? And not for only very few. And yeah, sometimes there is conflicting sides on this, but yeah, I hope we'll make it happen. We have to make it happen.
We
Sorry.
have to make it happen. I agree with
Mm.
that aspect.
Yes. Yeah.
Lenny, we spoke previously about what's the bottleneck for quantum startups and how it's hard to convince the customers and that very often the hardware is not
Mhm.
even ready yet and so on.
Yeah.
What are the other aspects that you will say cause or kill, let's say kill most of quantum startups today from your perspective?
I guess I think what's the difficult part is to find the right business plan, right? What will actually create, this is the difficulty, what will actually, in the field that we discussed before, right? Where there are no immediate revenues, very tough,
Yeah.
is to find a way to grow, I guess, your the market and the customers with your technology and convince them of your added value. I think what could fail if you put yourself into too much of a niche, or in a place where there is just there is just not customer, the people not interested in what you have to offer, right? So. And I think this is what will or can make some quantum startups fail at some point. We haven't seen that many examples, but as I was telling you before, I think it's going to happen. And so you need to find some winning argument or some broader, I think.
No, that's so accurate.
Yeah.
I must say that from my perspective, like I spent most of my life in early stage startups in terms of
Mm-hmm.
my professional experience,
Okay.
16 years and so on. But when I started learning about quantum here a little bit 2 years ago, at first I couldn't imagine. Like it was my first question actually. So if the quantum computers are not ready yet, commercially ready to be, launched on the plot, how those companies are making any revenue? Like what are the objectives of the venture capital investing in them and so on and so on. It was like so abstract and different.
Yeah.
Obviously, long cycles are not unique. They are common for any deep
Yes.
tech companies,
Uh-huh.
even in medical world, which I had a background before.
Experience.
Well,
Mhm.
yeah, but this is different. This is different
Yeah,
because
yeah, it is long term.
yeah,
Yeah,
in the medical world, the cycles are long, but they're pretty much defined, like
yeah,
step by step. You know what to do. I think in quantum, there's no this certainty that even if you go through the whole cycle, at the end of this, you will find this business model, you will find those customers, and
yeah.
basically the technology will be used. So the
So
world
you
is, I
need
think,
yeah, 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 yeah.
more difficult.
Yeah, you need the trust from the VCs, and sometimes they lose their patience, and that's why it's important to show milestones. to show
Yeah.
milestones so often, like to demonstrate that you are advancing towards your objectives.
Yeah.
This is
And
important.
this is also probably the reason why there's now so many venture capitalists investing in quantum
Yeah.
space, because most of the venture capitalists, they are not technological people. They are not, well, they are technological people, but they are not having technology background in the
Yeah.
sense. And that's what you said, right? Speaking with different stakeholders require using a different language.
Like
And
finance people, for example. Yeah, it's a whole different world.
yeah, it's all different words. And um, different stakeholders look for their own different angles and like glasses, let's say, in that
Yeah.
way. Okay, so let's talk, Eleni, right now a little bit more about future, and
Yes.
maybe or maybe not, you will have some bold prediction for me and our audience. So first of all, I want to ask you, what in your opinion will exist first, a useful quantum computer or a real quantum network?
Yes, it's a tricky one. A real quantum network, I think it makes
Mhm.
for me, and I believe this because I think that quantum networking will enable a useful quantum computer too. So actually, I believe very much into that. So I think it can go into this direction. Quantum networking in general
Right.
advances fast first, and then we'll see a large scale fault tolerant quantum computer, possibly and most likely enabled also by quantum networking. That's what I think.
So connected to each other.
Mhm.
Okay. And when do you think that's gonna happen?
Hmm. Okay. Temporal horizons. Well, we did talk about it before when we talked about the quantum internet and how it's
But
going to look. I said about
the
2030. Yeah, to actually see a useful quantum computer where useful could be a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, which is the
okay.
one that breaks encryption, or it could be a computer that actually solves a very important quantum chemistry problem, right? So it can be, or it can create a new material or something. So I guess following my logic, this will take a little bit longer. So yeah, I would put it a little bit further. I think we can see like a more,
2035,
35. Yeah, it's like,
maybe
I think so. Yeah,
something like that.
think
So
so.
we will need 4 years approximately for the quantum network, and another 5 years
That's
maybe
what I think.
for
Yes, yes.
the useful
Yeah.
quantum computer. That also can be defined
It
in this.
doesn't mean that it's not useful before. That's why, quantum computing companies do sell some QPUs, right? Because quantum processing units, because, you can try them
Yeah,
with different things, and so, but we
yeah,
have to be
you're right.
patient.
Useful is not the right definition. Maybe it should
Yeah,
be
yeah.
commercially valuable, or like
Well, yeah,
fully
exactly.
commercially.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. And then um from your perspective, if you can mention one thing in the industry that we believe today that may be wrong, what that would
That I hope, I guess it's wrong to believe that a quantum computer, maybe there's still some belief in some, although I think it's a bit less the case now. There
be.
is some belief in quantum, in non-quantum, like in the business and
Yeah.
industry, that a quantum computer will solve any possible problem. So this is wrong. Okay. So I
Yeah.
think there is some hype around this, right?
Yeah.
So and because I think we're all, and I'm particularly sensitive when people start saying that it will solve climate change and things like that, that makes me feel uncomfortable because I think
Mhm.
we should not create hype around what a quantum computer can do. I think it can be revolutionize many sectors, but it will not diminish poverty, in the world. So I think this extreme hype around the quantum computing is wrong. So I think the industry should be aware of this. And then yeah, I guess it's my major thing. What else could be wrong? I think also those that say that a monolithic, a single quantum, but again, this is my thing, right?
This is your
That a monolithic, like a one quantum computer can will be able to become a fault tolerant quantum computer. I don't think this is going to happen. I believe more in modular than quantum computing.
you need to be
So
a network from your.
I think so. Yes. So I'm pretty convinced about that. Yeah.
I like this more realistic approach of yours,
Uh,
to be honest.
mhm.
I think the hype around quantum is kind of comparable to the hype about AI. When people think, oh, AI can,
Yeah.
we have seen this couple of years ago. AI will solve all of our problems. And a lot of people just forgot that it's like a language model rather than, super smart machine and so on. So it may be comparable here.
Yeah.
We're not going to
Yeah.
solve all of humanity problems in the next 5 years or 4 years?
For sure, it will probably create more humanity problems, AI, and I hope it won't be the same. And I really hope it won't be the same for quantum, right? And that
That's
I
true,
really hope
but
we
really,
can avoid this.
that nobody look at, right? That historically, every new invention, every new technology, not only bring us the good things, they also bring us the bad things
Yeah, so,
and
so we
problems.
should regulate. I'm all for regulation. As a true European, I'm definitely for regulation. AI of quantum of everything.
It's a true European and definitely regulation. I like that
Yes.
statement. I like that statement. Okay.
Yes, so
Another question from the prediction category, let's say. Is there anything that you think, if I invite you again to my podcast in 5 years from now,
I hope you will.
I I would love to. What do you think will change?
In 5 years, okay.
Mhm.
So according, if I want to be coherent with my predictions,
Yeah.
we will
Your
have a
network.
quantum network. We will manage, in my opinion, so we will manage to deploy a more significant and operational quantum networking infrastructures. We will have managed to connect also quantum network with quantum networking some QPUs, but maybe not sufficiently enough to, break all records and do all the applications that are hoped for by quantum computing, but will be in a good way. So we'll have advanced quite a bit in the use cases as well in the quantum algorithms, so the software layer, of a management and an algorithmic layer. And I hope we will have. My hope is that we'll have significant milestones, and all of this happening that to maintain interest in the technology. I would not want. I would be very sad to see, the famous winter happening,
Yeah.
where because there is no, there is no huge breakthrough. There is like a loss of interest. Of course, it has happened to other technologies, and people, kept
Nanotechnology.
working on them in their lab, and they did make advances. I'm pretty optimistic that I don't think this will happen because there's so many things to do, and I think we have like many milestones to go through. That I'm really hoping that we will maintain the dynamics, and so I really hope that we'll be talking in 5 years in the podcast, and like the funding will still be maintained, because to do all of this, to break all these barriers, and we need, everybody needs money, from the researcher like me to the entrepreneur, and of course governments and everything. They will need money to maintain the momentum. So I hope that this is how situation will be, and that we'll be talking about, maybe talking more about regulation, because maybe the AI moment of quantum will be there. So, yeah.
Similar to you, I hope that the stagnation phase or the winter will not happen to quantum technology, similar as it happened, for example, to nanotechnology. When you said that,
Mhm.
I just was thinking
Yeah.
nanotechnology was the big thing, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, right? When everyone was talking about and everyone
Yeah.
was like trying to, innovate in that space. And then somehow
It
this not
kind of, yeah.
did not happen. I mean, it's still there, but it wasn't like the big breakthrough that everyone was hoping
Mhm.
through. But similar to you, I think it's not gonna happen because the last 2, 3 years, I think, prove that so much is happening in the quantum world. The future right now look bright. But obviously, as usual, time will verify.
Yes.
That is the best judge on this. Okay, last question. Imagine you had $1 billion to deploy in quantum today. Where would you put it?
I will give it to no, no.
Put the whole $1 billion to one company.
I mean,
How would you
I had to
distribute
say
it?
that. I had to say that. Okay, what I would do with 1 billion, which is this is at the level a bit of a strategy, right? Of like
Yeah.
like even European level strategies. Yeah, I would support. Still do not remove funding from fundamental research. So I mean, I have to say that. So this would never be here. Would never be where we are without fundamental research. So I would keep some part for fundamental research and training, help as well startups and companies scale up. I would also give some money to infrastructures, because I think this is really important. I don't know how if we emphasize the role.
Can you precise what do you mean about infrastructure?
like quantum computing, so I'm thinking more of quantum computing and quantum communication infrastructure is like to maintain, the deployment of quantum device in real conditions. That's what I mean by infrastructure, okay? And so it's in the synergy and combination with classical computing and networking, as we were saying before, infrastructures. So, and find some model to provide access as well to everyone, to researchers and to the industry. Yeah, I would pick a few champions, as we were saying before, from the startup so yeah, to push consolidations that make sense. I think that's also to create European champions in quantum computing and networking, and that's what I would do with 1
That's very
billion.
beautiful, and that's so much European patriotics of you. And with this beautiful aspect, I think we're gonna end up today.
Okay.
We are getting almost to 1 hour, so it'll be one of our
Okay.
longest. But the time flies so fast, and I really, really enjoy Eleni to talk to you. So thank you so much for being here with us today, ladies and gentlemen. That was a Professor Eleni Diamanti today, our special guest. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Eva.
That was Blond and Quantum. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the quantum business frontier. If you liked the episode, please review it on Spotify or Apple Podcast and help more people discover the quantum world without needing to untangle the theoretical physics. See you next time, unless the cat changes the timeline first.